Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe my channel. Enjoy the listening. Human farmer fed a terribly hungry alien baby dragon on his farm. Then something spectacular happened. The wind came from the east that morning, dry and full of grit, the kind of wind that scratched your throat and made the barn doors creak like ghosts. Jeb Growling was halfway through fixing the irrigation rig when he saw the dust moving strangely in the field. It was not like the usual wind-curled tumbleweeds or lazy coils of air. This dust was sharp, jagged, purposeful. He dropped his wrench, wiped sweat from his brow, and squinted into the glare. It was small, whatever it was, too small for a coyote, too fast for a raccoon. It tumbled forward, collapsing now and then as if it couldn't quite decide whether to walk or fall, and it shimmered, its hide catching the light in an almost metallic way. Jeb had seen some strange things in his time. He'd lived through the moonstorms of '36, the drought riots, and even that time the sky turned green for a week when a comet passed too close, but nothing quite like this. When the creature finally stopped a few yards from his boots and crumpled into the dirt, Jeb slowly knelt. It was no bigger than a calf, scrawny in the belly but wide in the shoulders, with wings tucked so tight they looked broken. Its tail was curled like a whip, and the creature was covered in thin, glass-like scales that flickered between blue and silver. Its breath came in shallow huffs, barely audible. A dragon, a real one, alien, no doubt. No earth beast had wings shaped like folded blades or eyes that glowed faintly violet. Its claws were cracked, its legs wobbled, and its ribs showed clearly through its armored skin. Jeb could have backed away. He could have gone inside, locked the doors, called the county ranger, or shot the thing from a safe distance, but the damn thing whimpered like a starving pup. "Well now," Jeb muttered, half to himself and half to the creature, "ain't you a long way from home?" The dragon cracked one eye open at his voice but didn't move. It didn't even flinch when Jeb reached into his jacket and pulled out a half-eaten jerky stick. Jeb held it out, palm open. The creature hesitated, then slowly, shakily reached forward with its neck and took the meat between delicate teeth. Its jaws didn't snap, they trembled. Jeb sat down, cross-legged in the dirt, pulling a canteen from his belt. "Let's get you something to drink, little one," he said softly. It drank with its eyes closed, as if it were safe, like it had never been safe until that moment. Jeb didn't know what it meant to feed an alien dragon that looked like it had just crawled out of hell, but he figured he was already committed. The dragon didn't move much after the first day. It curled up in the shade of the grain silo, too weak to fly, too tired to run. Jeb brought it water every couple of hours and the old meat scraps he could spare. The thing ate everything, even the turnips. Seemed particularly fond of sweet corn, which Jeb found both strange and endearing. On the second morning, it tried to stand on all fours, its back legs buckled and it face-planted into a trough. Jeb laughed so hard he nearly dropped the bucket he was holding. The dragon hissed, a puff more embarrassed than angry, and then snorted out a tiny plume of fire, not even fire really, more like a hiccup, a golden spark. Jeb blinked and then chuckled again. "Well damn, guess that settles it, your spark now." The dragon tilted its head at him, then blinked slowly as if accepting the name. From then on, Jeb talked to it like he would an old mule. "Morning, Spark. Got some chicken scraps for you, or I don't suppose you know how to fix a leaky valve, do you? And once, if you're going to roast something with that fire of yours, try not to pick the barn." The dragon watched him, always. Those violet eyes followed him as if trying to memorize the way he moved, the way he spoke. It didn't growl, it didn't snarl, just ate, slept, and watched. By the third night, it had started following him around the field, just a few feet behind, tail dragging, wings still limp. When Jeb sat on the porch that evening, it curled up nearby, resting its chin on its front claws, and when the stars came out, Jeb looked up and said softly, "Someone's missing you, aren't they?" The dragon didn't respond, but it didn't look away from the stars either. Jeb sipped from his mug and watched it breathe slow. Even then, he didn't know where Spark had come from or who had come looking, but something in his gut told him that whoever they were, they'd notice soon, and the sky would change when they did. The fourth morning was the first time Spark tried to fly. Jeb had just finished checking the west irrigation line when a gust of wind nearly knocked his hat off. He turned, fast, shotgun instinctively half-raised, only to see a silver-blue blur streak past the upper edge of the silo. It wobbled badly, wings beating like broken sails, but the creature stayed airborne for a full 5 seconds before tumbling into a hay pile with a very undignified whump. Jeb lowered the shotgun, shook his head, and chuckled, trying to show off now, are we? The dragon crawled out of the hay, spitting out straw and making a sound that could have been a snort or a sneeze, Jeb couldn't be sure. The farm dog Barker barked twice and sprinted toward Spark, thinking it was a game. Spark flared his wings in surprise, tumbled backward, and rolled straight into Jeb's water barrels. Now that's just wasteful, Jeb muttered, striding over to untangle the drenched mess of wings, scales, and confusion. Spark wheezed, blinking water out of his eyes as Jeb reached down and helped him up. Easy now, you got legs like a calf born yesterday, but you're flying like you think you're a kestrel. The dragon huffed again. Jeb knelt and looked him over. His scales were healing, richer in color now with hints of deep purple along the edges. The wings were still a little ragged, but they'd been improving, and his muscles were fuller, stronger. Spark had grown even in just a few days. Jeb wasn't sure if that was normal. Then again, nothing about a baby alien dragon stranded on a human farm was normal. You keep eating like you do, Jeb said, you'll outgrow the barn by harvest. The dragon made a low cheering noise that almost sounded like laughter. That evening, Jeb lit the fire pit beside the porch, cooking up a mix of smoked pork and charred carrots with a little sour corn mash on the side. Spark sat nearby, watching the flames dance. When Jeb tossed a slab of meat his way, the dragon caught it midair with a precision that startled even Barker. Now that, Jeb said, is slicker than a greased gear. Spark tilted his head and then, as if responding to something deep inside him, opened his mouth. A perfect arc of fire shot across the pit, igniting the second log in an instant. Jeb just stared. Well, he said after a long pause, I'll be damned, you're starting to earn your keep. Spark's chest rumbled a low, satisfied purr. They sat in silence a long while, staring at the fire, Jeb gently rocking in his chair, and Spark stretched out in the dirt, tail flicking his belly full, wings twitching in his sleep. In the sky above them, far past the soft purple clouds, something shimmered, a glimmer like a flicker of starlight seen through mist. Jeb didn't see it, not yet, but the sky had started watching back. 2 days later, the storm came. It wasn't natural, Jeb knew natural, this wasn't that. He was out at the silo with Spark, checking the grain levels when the wind changed. It dropped too fast, went dead still, as if the air had forgotten how to move. The clouds were there, but wrong, heavy yet bright, shifting like metal underwater, flickering with light that had no place in the sky. Spark froze, his head shot upward, wings snapped open, tail stiff. Something wrong? Jeb asked, his voice already quiet. The dragon didn't answer, it just stared. The cloud split without sound, and from the gap, 3 silver ships descended. They didn't fall, they arrived as though the sky had opened a hidden door and let them step through. Jeb stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a hose reel. The ships hovered low, not more than 50 meters above the barn, sleek and silent, shaped like elongated teardrops, each one glowing along its seams with golden veins of energy. Barker started barking wildly, but Spark let out a sound Jeb hadn't heard before, not a roar, not a call, but a soft, deep, resounding note. One of the ships responded, a ripple of energy vibrated through the air, and a blue light formed beneath it, like a ramp made of rippling glass. A figure descended, tall, cloaked, humanoid but not human, with skin like polished stone and eyes like burning moons. Jeb grabbed the rake by the barn door, his hands shaking. Spark stepped between him and the alien, protective, his body tense. The being raised its hands, not in threat but in peace, and then spoke, not aloud but in Jeb's mind, "We have come for our kin." Jeb blinked, stunned. He looked at Spark, who had turned fully toward the figure. Now his tail thumped once, twice, recognition. The voice came again, he was lost. "We mourned him." The alien lowered itself to one knee. "You fed our youngling, you gave him shelter. He speaks your name in reverence." Spark turned his head, looked back at Jeb, his eyes shining with something beyond intelligence, something ancient. The alien rose. "For your kindness, farmer of Earth, we offer thanks and more." Jeb, who'd lived alone for decades, who'd buried 2 wives in a lifetime of silence beneath these fields, felt something he hadn't in years, tears, not from sorrow, but from awe. He reached out, touched Spark's side. "Well," he said softly, "reckon the sky did notice after all. They did not come as conquerors, that much is clear." The 3 alien ships lowered their landing gears with a grace that didn't disturb a single stalk of corn. Energy fields spread beneath them to protect the soil, humming with quiet resonance that made Jeb's bones tingle. Out of the second ship came 3 more beings, similar in shape to the first, though one was taller and clad in silvery armor that shimmered like wet stone, while the others wore flowing garments that moved like mist in moonlight. They stood beside the first, never speaking with mouths, but radiating a presence that Jeb could feel deep in his chest. Spark moved to greet them. There was a solemnity in his walk, a sense of return. He chirped once, quiet, reverent. The armored one approached Spark and knelt, pressing their forehead gently to the base of his neck. The air pulsed with a wave of soft, gold light, and for a moment, the sky itself felt warmer. Spark leaned into the touch. Jeb watched from a few paces back, the rake still in hand, though it hung loosely now, as he wasn't sure what to do with it anymore. The first being turned to him and said, "Your kindness mended what distance tried to break. He was lost when the rift storm scattered our hatchlings across the quadrant, alone, young, weak." The voice vibrated through Jeb's skull like music played on a deep cello string. The words weren't English, not really, but they made sense. They felt true. The second being raised a hand, and a projection appeared in the air like smoke given shape, a vision of a planet, lush and violet-skied, cracked open by space storms, with small dragons, hundreds scattered into void corridors like fish pulled by invisible nets. One of them, Spark, even smaller than he was now, tumbling alone into blackness. "We thought him perished," the being intoned. Jeb shook his head, swallowing a lump. "He showed up half dead, ribs poking through like fence wire, ate like a horse, and curled up like a kitten." A silence followed, then the first being smiled, no mouth, just the curve of light across its face, changing shape, and so he lived. Spark trotted back toward Jeb, then nudged the farmer gently in the side with his warm snout. Jeb scratched under his jaw without thinking, murmuring, "You picked the right dirt to land on, Spark." The third being, smaller than the rest, stepped forward and offered Jeb a small sphere. He hesitated, the being encouraged him silently. He reached out, and as his fingers closed around it, the sphere glowed and data poured into his mind, not painful, not invasive, a download made of memory, of gratitude, of seeds, blueprints, and knowledge, how to fix, how to grow, how to mend for the life you saved. "We give you the gift to make yours richer." Jeb exhaled sharply, almost laughed. "I'm just a farmer," he muttered. "Then you understand what it means to plant something and watch it live." He looked down at the sphere, and for the first time since the world changed, he felt wonder again. They stayed for the evening. 6 more dragons emerged from the other ships and joined Spark in a flight that painted the sky with arcs of bioluminescent light. They weaved between clouds, dove through the evening mist, and lit up the horizon like living auroras. Jeb sat on his porch, knees creaking, mug of sweet corn tea in hand, watching it all unfold like some galactic ballet. The guests gathered around him and asked questions, some spoken, some simply shared through thought, about soil, water, crops, and the concept of patience. Jeb did his best to explain how time passed on a farm. You don't make the corn grow, he said, you give it a reason to. They listened intently. One of them touched the soil and conjured a vision of it alive, vast, teeming with invisible life all working in harmony. Then they adjusted something Jeb couldn't see, and the ground around the barn shimmered with brief light. Minutes later, fresh sprouts pushed up through dirt that had been too dry for weeks. Barker barked once and then flopped in the grass, utterly unbothered, as the dragons landed curling up near the edges of the field. Spark returned to Jeb's side, resting his head on the farmer's lap, wings tucked tight, eyes half closed. Jeb stroked the scales between his eyes. I reckon you're headed back with them soon, he said softly. Spark blinked slowly, nuzzled his palm. The first alien approached once more. He may return to us, but the bond he has made here is unbroken. Jeb nodded. He didn't hug Spark long, but long enough. Long enough, the being echoed. To shape more than you know. They gifted him another device, an orb the size of an apple, which they said would allow Spark to return if he ever chose not to stay necessarily, but to visit, to remember. When the ships finally lifted, it was without sound or wind, just a rising glow that vanished into the stars. Spark didn't go with them, not yet. He stayed curled by the porch, watching the sky as if listening, and Jeb, old, sun-weathered, worn down to his boots, sat beside him with a warm cup. He felt, perhaps for the first time in a long while, that the universe wasn't as far away as he once thought. Sometimes, when you feed a starving stranger at your door, the stars themselves come back to thank you. The ships were long gone, burned into memory like a dream half forgotten at sunrise, yet Spark remained, not because he was bound, nor because he owed anything. He stayed because he chose to. For days after the visit, the land felt different, not just greener, richer. The soil responded to Jeb's hands as if it never had before. Seeds took root faster, water moved cleaner, and machines that hadn't worked in years hummed to life when Jeb touched them. The orb he had been given sat on the windowsill above his sink, pulsing faintly with a warmth that felt like it watched over him, silently protecting everything within its radius. Spark helped with the chores in his own strange ways. He would glide overhead, scaring off the flocks of iron beaks that tried to peck at the seedlings. His flame breath, now more controlled, would light the evening fires with precision, never too much, never wild. Once, he even used his claws to drag a broken tractor back from the edge of the field after Jeb threw out his back trying to budge himself. Jeb, stubborn as any mule, had tried to refuse the help. You'll spoil the land, he grumbled, but Spark simply blinked and grunted, lifting the rusted thing like a toy. Together, they settled into something resembling peace. Then the letters started coming, first a message from Earth's interstellar registry, a brief ping through the local relay, informing Jeb that an unauthorized celestial encounter had been logged on his coordinates. Next, a visit from two clean-suited government reps, who came by in a dust-covered skimmer, peered into his barn as though they expected an alien armory, and left with more questions than answers. After Spark disappeared into the cornfields and finally word came from across the farming belt, strange crops growing better than they should, light spotted in the skies, dragons glimpsed in flight, Jeb said nothing. He didn't lie either, he just didn't explain more than he had to. One evening, as he sat with Spark by the fire pit, watching a storm roll far across the plains, he said quietly, "You know they'll come sniffing harder, don't you?" Spark didn't answer with words, he curled his tail gently around Jeb's chair, his wings folding tight. "They won't understand," Jeb muttered. "To them, you're a marvel, a weapon, a thing to study, lock up, and that ain't right, but it's what they do." Spark lifted his head toward the sky. Lightning flickered on the horizon like a warning, and then he turned those violet eyes on Jeb and let out a soft rumble that felt like a promise, not a threat, but an assurance. "Not if I'm here," Jeb sighed, rubbing his chin. "Then I reckon we'll have to teach them something better." He reached down and patted Spark's scaled flank. "You ever heard of a town hall?" Spark blinked once. "You will." The council chamber in Rust Bend was an old mining hall with bad lighting and even worse coffee. Jeb hadn't stepped foot in it for 15 years, not since they'd almost found him for installing illegal water channels during the drought of '47. But that night, he walked in with Spark trailing behind him like a silent shadow. The place went dead quiet. Dozens of voices hushed mid-sentence, eyes widened, a fork clattered to the floor. Somewhere, Sheriff Bram took one step forward, hand twitching toward his sidearm, before Jeb shot him a look so sharp it could have scraped paint off a hover truck. "This here's Spark," Jeb said. "He ain't dangerous, he's a guest." Spark curled his tail neatly beneath him and sat with his wings folded. The firelight caught his scales just right, and he looked more like a statue than a living thing, but his eyes glowed, calm, intelligent, ancient. They didn't speak, they didn't need to. Jeb told them the story about the dragon who stumbled onto his land half-dead, about the ships that came days later, about the gifts left behind, about how the land had changed and how he had changed. He didn't exaggerate, and he didn't make it sound like a miracle, he made it sound like what it was, a hungry soul saved by kindness. Sheriff Bram didn't speak for a while, nor did the mayor, a pinched old woman named Reva Thorne, who once tried to outlaw goats for being chaotic. Then little Marn Jasper, age 7, walked right up to Spark and hugged his leg, breaking the silence. After that, things moved faster. Jeb and Spark became local legend, not the kind that gets passed down in whispers, but the kind they carved into town signs. Home of the first dragon encounter, the new plaque read. Tourists came, reporters too. Jeb gave a few interviews, mostly grunts and head nods, while Spark refused to be filmed unless it was sunrise or sunset, because the lighting was better, or so Jeb joked. Through it all, the bond held. When harvest came early that year, with bushels overflowing, the orchard fruit blushing too ripe, too fast, Jeb didn't need science to tell him why. He just looked at Spark and said, "You've done right by this world, boy." That night, under a meteor-slick sky, Spark stood tall on the barn roof, wings wide, a beacon of starlight and silence, and Jeb, leaning on the fence post, watching the wind ripple through his fields, understood something deeper than gratitude. He understood that sometimes the greatest return on kindness isn't gold or glory, sometimes it's just knowing the stars remember, and they bring their children home to thank you. The winds changed again the morning they returned, not the soft kind that usually danced through the wheat or rattled the wind chimes on Jeb's porch. No, this wind was heavy with silence, as if the sky itself was bracing for something profound. Jeb was repairing a fence post out near the east field when the air turned sharp, the sunlight dimmed, and every bird in the distance vanished into stillness. He looked up, the sky had opened once again. Not 3 ships this time, but 7. They descended slowly, reverently, casting long shadows over the farmland. They did not land in the field, nor did they hover like the first visitors, instead, they lined the sky like sentinels, motionless, surrounding the valley with celestial presence. Beneath the largest ship, a shimmering path of light descended, spiraling soft like a staircase made of liquid gold. Spark was already waiting. He stood in the barn's shadow, larger than ever, wings coiled tight against his back, violet eyes reflecting every flicker of the strange light, his scales glistening with the polish of maturity, no longer the thin shimmer of a hatchling. This was a young star walker, now born of storm, raised by soil. He stepped forward, and Jeb moved too, one hand resting on Spark's neck. Then the sky whispered, not in thunder, not in commands, but in music, chords of light, each note like a brushstroke across the world's canvas. The very grass hummed. The clouds above bent and refracted in alien patterns from the golden stairway. 3 figures descended, not like rulers, not like gods, but as kin. One was the same being who had first spoken in Jeb's mind, another was taller, horned, adorned in garments of woven starlight, the last was something different, smaller, radiant, transparent. They stopped before Jeb and bowed. He has chosen, Jeb nodded, though he didn't yet know what that meant. He will carry both names, the one of stars and the one of earth. He will carry our care in his heart until suns die. Spark stepped forward, exhaling softly, a ring of flame passed over the dirt, not burning but cleansing. Then, in a motion that stunned every farmer watching from the town hilltop, Spark bowed to Jeb, lowered his head all the way, as if in final thanks. Jeb's throat tightened. His hands, strong from a life of lifting stone and tilling soil, trembled just slightly. I raised corn, he said, voice cracking, not kings. But Spark nudged his hand gently, and in that moment the meaning passed clearly between them. You raised something more than corn, you raised me. And with that, Spark spread his wings. The ground shook not from power, but from farewell, as Spark ascended the golden path. The valley below lit up with every color of dawn, children cheered, elders wept, and even the sky seemed to hesitate, reluctant to close behind him. When the last beam of light vanished, Jeb stood alone again in the field, but not empty. The earth beneath his feet was richer now, his heart fuller. Something had passed through him, through this quiet piece of nowhere, and it had left a mark deeper than time. Years passed. The world changed, but the farm remained. Jeb never left the growing acres, why would he? The soil was part of him now, and Spark's fire still slept in the roots of the land. The crops never failed, not once. Rain came when it needed to, frost respected the fences. He grew older, as men do. His beard silvered, his back bent, but his mind stayed sharp and his hands steady. Every so often, on the clearest nights, a star would streak across the sky and pause just for a heartbeat, just long enough, and Jeb would tip his hat and murmur, "Safe travel, Spark."